I never thought betrayal could feel so much like suffocation. Nina's world had always been one of safety, routine, and love. Or so she thought. That night, the truth shattered it all. The truth hit her with the force of a freight train as the message flashed on her phone. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't keep it from you anymore. I've fallen in love with your husband." The words burned through her chest, as if her heart was trying to escape her body. She reread it. Then again, and again. Her vision blurred, the edges of the screen growing fuzzy. How was it even possible? She'd always trusted Liam. She had given him everything, her heart, her trust, her soul. But now, nothing mattered. Her entire existence, the love they had built, was collapsing. With shaking hands, she picked up the phone and called him. The call rang once, twice. Then, on the third ring, his voice, gruff, almost apologetic, came through. "Nina? What's wrong?" "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a long silence. It wasn't the silence of a man who was caught off guard. No, it was the silence of someone who had already been preparing himself for this very moment. "Nina," Liam said finally, his voice soft and full of regret. But she couldn't hear him. The world around her began to spin. She wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Instead, she whispered, "How long, Liam? How long have you been lying to me? When someone tells you the truth, you can't go back. Not to who you were, and certainly not to who you thought they were." The conversation with Liam was a blur. He confessed everything, every detail, every lie, every moment of their secret world. He had been seeing her, the woman who had shattered Nina's world, over the past year. She was younger, more vibrant, someone who gave him a freedom that Nina didn't even know he was craving. Liam cried. He begged. He promised that he didn't mean for any of this to happen, that he loved Nina, but Nina couldn't hear him. The words he said, the apologies, the regret, none of it mattered now. Everything that Nina had built her life on, the trust, the love, the shared moments, was now a lie. She felt numb, the kind of numbness that comes when you realize the life you thought you had was nothing but an illusion. Days passed, but the storm inside her didn't subside. Every waking moment felt like a nightmare. She couldn't escape the thoughts that consumed her. Did she even know Liam? How could he have hidden this for so long? What kind of person was she to have missed the signs? And what now? Where did she go from here? It was like living inside a thunderstorm, everything loud, intense, and overwhelming, but without any way to find shelter. Nina didn't know how to breathe. The pain was unbearable. The shock of the affair kept her awake at night, replaying every moment with Liam, looking for any clues she missed. How had she been so blind? How had she not seen the cracks? She wanted to talk to someone, anyone, but she was afraid. She wasn't ready for their judgment. So, she kept it all in, burying herself under the weight of her own grief. She started questioning herself. Was it her fault? Had she been a bad wife? She had to do something, anything, to get out of this whirlwind of emotions. She booked an appointment with a therapist. At least that was a step in the right direction. But even as she drove to the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was no way out, no way to put the pieces back together. She sat across from Dr. Edwards, her therapist, trying to explain the unexplainable. But no words seemed right. She wanted to scream, but instead, tears flooded her eyes. The shame, the betrayal, the loneliness, it all came crashing down. Who was I now? Who could I be when everything I knew about myself had been rewritten in a single moment? The weeks following Liam's confession were the darkest of Nina's life. She barely recognized herself anymore. The woman who had once been so confident, so sure of her place in the world, had disappeared. Now, there was only doubt, fear, and an aching emptiness that gnawed at her every moment. She couldn't look at Liam without feeling disgust. Every word he spoke felt like a betrayal. Even the simplest interactions, picking up his laundry, serving dinner, felt like she was living with a stranger. Every touch, every kiss they had shared now seemed tainted, poisoned by his lies. It was impossible to escape the feelings that churned within her. And yet, as the days went on, she realized that she had to. She had to do something to regain control over her life, something that would help her find herself again. That meant stepping away from him. Even if it was just for a little while. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It's not a straight line, but a winding road with detours, dead ends, and obstacles along the way. Nina decided she needed space. She moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, far from their shared home, from all the memories that tied her to Liam. She didn't tell him at first. She simply packed her things one night, left a note on the kitchen counter, and walked out. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sliver of peace. No longer did she have to live under the same roof as the man who had destroyed her sense of self. She could breathe again. But the silence that followed was deafening. The loneliness was suffocating. She had thought that leaving would bring relief, but now she wasn't so sure. There were moments when she felt like a stranger in her own life. Who was she now, without Liam? Without the identity she had built around their marriage? She started going to therapy regularly. Dr. Edwards suggested she find a new hobby, something that would reintroduce her to the person she used to be before she became consumed by her relationship with Liam. Nina began painting again, something she had loved doing in her younger years but had abandoned in the rush of adulthood. It was a slow process, but for the first time, Nina felt like she was taking back control. The woman who had once depended on Liam for everything was starting to find her own strength again. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It rises up to meet you when you least expect it. Nina had been doing well. She was painting more, working through her pain, and focusing on herself. She was starting to feel like her again. But then, one day, the doorbell rang. Liam stood on the doorstep, his face full of regret and desperation. The sight of him brought a rush of emotions: anger, sadness, longing, and even a small part of her still loved him. But Nina wasn't sure if she could trust that part of herself anymore. "I miss you," Liam said, his voice breaking. "I've been going to therapy too. I know it doesn't fix what I did, but I'm trying, Nina. I'm trying to be better. Please, just give me a chance to show you." Nina felt a wave of anger rise in her. How could he be here, asking for a chance when he had torn their lives apart? The audacity, the selfishness, it was unbearable. But she couldn't close the door completely. Part of her still wanted to believe in the man she once loved. Part of her still wanted to forgive him. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about your peace of mind. After days of thinking, Nina knew she had to make a choice. Did she want to stay with Liam and try to rebuild their marriage? Or did she walk away for good? The decision wasn't easy. There were so many layers of emotion, so many fears and hopes. Could she ever trust him again? Could she ever feel whole again with him? Or would she always be haunted by his betrayal? In the end, Nina knew that forgiveness wasn't for Liam, it was for herself. She needed to let go of the anger, the bitterness, and the resentment. Not because he deserved it, but because she deserved to move forward. She agreed to give him one more chance, but on her terms. No more lies, no more secrets. Their marriage would either survive or die, but only if they both worked for it. Trust doesn't just rebuild itself. It's a slow, painful process, and sometimes you wonder if it's even worth it. Rebuilding trust was harder than Nina had ever imagined. Every moment felt like a test. Could she really believe in Liam again? Could she ever forget the pain? The doubts crept in every time he left his phone unattended, every time he worked late, every time he walked into the room with a different expression on his face. But Nina was determined. She had to try. For herself. For the possibility of healing. They attended couples therapy together, working through their issues with Dr. Edwards. It was slow, painful work. Liam had to earn back Nina's trust, one step at a time, and Nina had to learn to forgive, not for him, but for her own peace. When the dust settles, the real work begins. Months passed, and their relationship was still fragile. Liam had apologized, done everything he could to prove his commitment. but the fear and suspicion still lingered in Nina's heart. Every day felt like a test. Could she let go of the past? Or was the betrayal something she could never truly move on from? Nina found herself questioning everything. Could she ever fully forgive Liam? Would she ever be able to trust him again? And more importantly, could their marriage survive, or was it destined to fail? Sometimes, you have to hit rock bottom to realize what really matters. Nina stood in the living room, staring out the window, her mind a chaotic storm of thoughts. They had been making progress, hadn't they? The small conversations, the attempts to reconnect, and yet there was a feeling deep inside her that wouldn't go away. It was like a constant whisper, reminding her of the cracks in their relationship, of the betrayal that still lingered between them. She had begun to feel like they were simply treading water. They weren't drowning anymore, but they weren't swimming either. The effort to rebuild had started to feel too heavy, like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry for much longer. Liam, on the other hand, seemed more committed than ever. He had apologized 1,000 times. He had shown her the phone records, his calendar, every little detail to prove he was committed to rebuilding their marriage. But each new attempt to prove himself only seemed to highlight how much trust had been shattered. There was a part of her that wanted to forgive him, that still loved him deeply. But there was another part of her, an angry, hurt part, that wanted to run, to escape this suffocating atmosphere of half-healing. One evening, after dinner, they sat together in silence. The weight of unspoken words hung heavily between them. "I can't do this anymore," Nina finally said, her voice breaking the silence like a thunderclap. Liam looked at her, his face pale. "What do you mean? I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when I'm falling apart inside," Nina whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so tired of this, Liam. I want to move on, but I don't know how. I don't know if I can. You destroyed everything." Liam reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I love you, but love isn't enough anymore, is it?" She continued, "I keep trying to forgive you. I keep trying to move forward. But it feels like we're living in a shadow of what we once were. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again." There was silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Nina knew, deep down, that this moment could break them, or it could be the turning point. Liam's eyes were filled with desperation. "Nina, please don't do this. I know I've hurt you, but I'm not the man I was. I've changed. I'm trying." Nina looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. "Maybe you've changed, Liam, but I haven't. And I don't think I ever will if I stay here. I need space. I need to find out who I am, without you." Liam stood up, pacing the room. "So, what? You're leaving me? After everything we've been through?" "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to figure it out. Alone." The hardest part of healing is the feeling of being untethered, floating in a sea of uncertainty, unsure of which way to turn. Nina left their home. It wasn't easy. She had packed her things and moved into an apartment she had rented without telling Liam. She knew it was the right thing to do. She needed time to find herself again, to rediscover who she was before Liam, before the affair. But it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. She hadn't expected to feel this empty. For the first time in a long while, Nina woke up alone, without Liam beside her. She could still smell his scent on the pillow, feel the warmth of his body next to hers. But it was all gone now. She spent her days working, going through the motions of life, but nothing seemed to hold her attention anymore. The silence in her apartment was deafening. She thought about the years they had spent together, the vacations, the laughter, the promises. And now, all of it was broken. She hadn't spoken to Liam since the night she left. She couldn't bring herself to. She knew that he was hurting too, but her pain was more immediate, more consuming. She couldn't afford to be concerned with his sorrow, not when her own heart was still in pieces. In therapy, Nina began to explore the roots of her need for validation through her relationship with Liam. She had always felt that love was the one thing she could control, the one thing she could depend on. And now love had betrayed her. Dr. Edwards gently guided her through the process of understanding how she had defined herself through her marriage. The realization was painful. She had been so focused on her role as a wife that she had neglected her own sense of self. Slowly, Nina began to peel back the layers of who she was. She reconnected with old friends, began writing again, and started rediscovering passions she had long buried under the weight of her relationship. But despite the progress, the loneliness still gnawed at her. Every night she would lie in bed and wonder if she had made the right decision. Was leaving him the right choice? Would she ever find the strength to forgive him? Sometimes, the hardest part of healing isn't finding the strength to move on, but the courage to stay in the fire long enough to burn away the pain. As the months passed, Nina began to rebuild. It wasn't easy, but she felt stronger. She started painting again, a hobby she had abandoned years ago. She found solace in the quiet brushstrokes, the rhythm of creating something beautiful from a blank canvas. It was cathartic, like each stroke washed away a piece of the hurt that had built up inside her. She also took up yoga, something she had always wanted to try but never found time for. The stillness of her practice, the focus on breathing and presence, allowed her to confront her emotions in a way she never had before. But there were still nights when the pain returned, when the memories of Liam would flood her mind, and she would wonder if she had made the right choice. She missed the old Liam, the man who had made her laugh, who had held her through hard times. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who had shattered everything they had built. In those moments of doubt, Nina would remind herself of why she left. She had to find herself again, to become whole, and the only way to do that was by confronting the pain, not running from it. He didn't know if he could survive the consequences of his actions. The weight of his guilt was unbearable. Liam spent his days in a haze of regret. He couldn't stop thinking about Nina. He couldn't stop blaming himself for what he had done. He knew he had destroyed everything, and no amount of apologies or promises would ever change that. He tried to move on, to fix things, but every time he saw Nina's face in his mind, he felt like a failure. He knew she was struggling without him, but he couldn't make it better. He had been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why he had cheated, why he had been so selfish, but nothing seemed to ease the gnawing feeling of guilt inside him. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else, it's a gift you give to yourself. But can you ever truly forgive someone who's broken you? It had been months since Nina left Liam. Time had passed, but the question lingered in her mind. Could she ever forgive him? The therapy sessions had helped. She was starting to feel more like herself, more grounded in who she was without Liam. She had reclaimed parts of herself that she had long neglected, the artist, the traveler, the woman who had dreams that didn't revolve around being someone's wife. But forgiveness, true forgiveness, still seemed like an elusive goal. Nina had been reading a lot about forgiveness. Books, articles, even spiritual teachings, anything that might shed light on how she could move forward. She knew it wasn't about excusing Liam's behavior or pretending the pain didn't exist. No, forgiveness was about finding peace within herself, about releasing the anger that bound her to the past. But every time she thought about it, something held her back. The pain was still too raw. One evening, Nina sat in her apartment, a glass of wine in hand, staring out the window at the city below. The moon was full, its light casting a soft glow over the buildings. She thought about all the times she and Liam had sat together, gazing out at the same view, talking about their future, dreaming together. Now, that future seemed like a distant memory, like a life that belonged to someone else. But what about the present? What about her future? She had to let go of the past to move forward, she knew that. But could she really forgive him? Could she rebuild a relationship that had been broken beyond recognition? The answer wasn't simple. There was no easy road. But what Nina knew for sure was that forgiveness wasn't something she could force. It would come when she was ready, when the hurt was no longer her constant companion. He couldn't stop the feeling of regret. It followed him like a shadow, and no matter what he did, it never left. Liam sat alone in his apartment, staring at the floor. He hadn't been able to sleep in weeks, and every day felt like a reminder of the mistake he had made. The guilt was consuming. It was as if it had become a part of him, always there, always pressing down on his chest, suffocating him. He hadn't seen Nina in weeks. Every time he tried to reach out, she pulled away. He knew he deserved it. He had betrayed her, destroyed everything they had built. He couldn't fix it. He couldn't take back the pain he had caused her. His therapist had been pushing him to understand why he had cheated, to uncover the deeper issues that had led him to make such a terrible decision. But no amount of self-reflection seemed to ease the guilt. He had ruined their future together, and now he didn't know if there was any way to repair the damage. There were moments when he thought about giving up, when he thought maybe it was better to let go, to let Nina find peace without him. But deep down, he knew he couldn't just walk away. He had to at least try to make things right, even if it meant failing. He picked up his phone and stared at Nina's number. For a moment, he considered calling her, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. A call wouldn't fix this. The damage was too deep. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that force you to face your past head-on. It was late in the evening when Nina's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something urged her to pick it up. "Hello?" she said, her voice cautious. "Nina." The voice was familiar, but it felt distant, like a memory she hadn't touched in a long time. "Liam." She froze, unsure of what to say. She had wanted this, wanted him to reach out, to show that he was willing to fight for her, to fight for their relationship. But now, hearing his voice again, the flood of emotions that she had been suppressing for months came rushing back. "Liam," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Why are you calling me?" "I don't know," Liam admitted. I needed to hear your voice." "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, Nina, but I had to at least try." Nina closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never expected him to reach out. She thought that if she left, if she walked away from him, it would force him to understand the consequences of his actions. But here he was, confessing his guilt, his regrets. "Liam, I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "I don't know if I can trust you again." "I understand," he said, his voice full of sorrow. "But I need you to know something. I am not the man I was when I hurt you. I know it's not enough, but I am trying. I am so sorry, Nina." Nina bit her lip, feeling the tears well up in her eyes. The pain of the past was still there, still raw, but something in his voice, the desperation, the remorse, made her wonder if it was possible to heal, even if they couldn't go back to what they had. "I don't know what I want anymore," Nina admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I know I can't keep living in this place of hurt. I need to figure out who I am without you, and I need time. Please, just give me time." Liam was silent for a long time. "I'll wait, Nina. I'll wait for you, no matter how long it takes." Nina let out a shaky breath, a part of her torn between hope and fear. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, she felt a small flicker of hope. Sometimes, moving forward means leaving the past behind, and other times, it means bringing the lessons from the past with you. The weeks following Liam's call were quiet. Nina didn't know what to do with herself. She had agreed to give him space, to figure out what she needed, but the silence between them was both comforting and agonizing. She had taken time to reconnect with her friends, to focus on herself, to find her footing again. She realized in those weeks of silence that the journey she was on was not about forgiving Liam. It was about forgiving herself. She had been holding on to the anger for so long, and while it had been justified, it had also kept her from moving forward. She had let his actions define her, let his betrayal dictate how she saw herself. But now, she understood that she couldn't live like that. She couldn't let him take any more from her. Nina began to write again. Journals, letters to herself, poems. Her creativity flowed back into her life, filling the emptiness that had once consumed her. She felt lighter, more connected to herself than ever before. The power to change your life is in your hands. You just have to decide to make the choice. Nina stood in front of the window one night, staring out at the world below. She had come a long way since she left Liam. She had rebuilt parts of herself she thought were lost. She had regained her independence, her strength, and her identity. But now, as she looked out into the night, she realized that she had to make a choice. Did she want to continue her life without Liam? Did she want to rebuild their marriage, despite everything that had happened? The power was hers to choose. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the choosing, it's knowing that once you choose, you can never go back to what was. Nina had never realized just how much her life had been governed by choices until now. Every step, every action had been shaped by her relationship with Liam. The good, the bad, and the ugly. She had spent so much time thinking about what she couldn't control. The lies and betrayals, the hurt. But now, standing on the edge of the person she was becoming, she realized that the power to move forward was hers, and only hers. For the past few weeks, she had been living a life of tentative peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She had carved out a space where she could breathe, where the pain of the past didn't feel suffocating. But every now and then, the memories of Liam would slip into her thoughts. The way his voice would soften when he apologized, how he would hold her just a little longer when they said goodbye. She had told herself that those moments didn't matter. But did they? Nina sat down at her desk and opened her journal. She had been writing to herself for weeks, processing her emotions, analyzing the past. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't writing to process the pain. Tonight, she was writing to find the answer. Do I stay or do I go? It was the simplest question, yet the most complicated. She had lived a life with Liam for years. They had built something together, something she wasn't sure she could just erase. But the damage was real. The betrayal had changed everything. And as much as she loved him, she knew the truth. She couldn't go back to the way things were. But could she build something new? Nina picked up her phone and stared at it for a long moment. She had been avoiding Liam's calls, avoiding the texts, the messages that begged her for a chance to talk. She had asked for space, and he had given it to her. But now she realized that the space wasn't just for him, it was for her. She needed to understand her own heart before she could decide what she wanted. And so she sent him a message. I need to see you. The moment she hit send, Nina felt a wave of relief, like she had finally taken control of the situation. But the fear, the uncertainty, was still there. She wasn't sure what would happen when they met, but she knew she had to face him. Face the man who had once been her everything, and decide what came next. Some moments feel like a final act, when everything that was is laid bare, and all that's left is the truth. They met in a small cafe, the kind of place where you could sit for hours without being disturbed, the kind of place that felt neutral, without the weight of their past hanging over them. Liam was already there when Nina arrived, sitting by the window, his face pale but hopeful. She noticed the way his hands trembled slightly as he picked up his coffee, and she realized how deeply this was affecting him. He stood up when he saw her, his eyes searching hers as though looking for any sign that she was still the woman he once knew. But Nina wasn't sure if she was that woman anymore. She had changed, grown in ways she hadn't expected. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for Liam to see that. Hi, she said softly, not knowing what else to say. Hi, Liam replied, his voice hoarse. Thank you for coming. I didn't know if you would. I wasn't sure if I would either, Nina admitted, sitting down across from him. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with years of history, regret, and unhealed wounds. Liam's eyes softened. I've been thinking about you every day, Nina, every moment since you left. I've been trying to figure out how I could have been so stupid, how I could have hurt you like that. I don't know if I can make it right, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying if you let me. Nina didn't speak immediately. She wasn't sure what to say. The old part of her, the part that had loved him so deeply, wanted to reach out, to tell him it was okay, to believe that they could make it through this. But the newer part of her, the part that had found herself again, the part that was no longer just his wife, felt something different. I've been thinking a lot too, Liam, she finally said, her voice steady but full of emotion. I've spent months figuring out who I am without you. And I've realized something. I don't think I can go back to the person I was. Liam's face fell, and Nina saw the hurt in his eyes. But there was something else there too, something he had been hiding for so long. His own fear of losing her for good. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly, his voice trembling. I love you, Nina. I always have. But I'll never forgive myself for what I did. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to. Know that I'm truly sorry. And if you need space, if you need time to figure out what you want, I'll respect that. I just need you to know that I'm here, and I'll wait. Nina sat back in her chair, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had always known that Liam loved her. She had always known that his actions were born out of weakness, out of his own insecurities, not malice. But love wasn't enough anymore. It hadn't been enough for him to stay faithful. And it wasn't enough for her to just return to the life they had before. She took a deep breath and looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time in a long time, she saw him. Not as her husband, not as the man who had betrayed her, but as a person who was genuinely trying to make amends. I need time, Nina said, her voice calm but firm. Time to figure out what I want. What we want. But more than that, I need to figure out who I am outside of this. I need to be whole again before I can make any decisions about our future. Liam nodded slowly, his face a mixture of relief and sorrow. I understand. I need you to know that I'll be here. Whenever you're ready. For the first time, Nina felt a sense of closure. She wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. But she wasn't holding on to the pain anymore. She was letting it go, piece by piece. And in that moment, she realized that the future wasn't about finding a way back to what had been. It was about finding a way forward, whether that was together or apart. As she stood up to leave, she turned back to Liam, her heart full of both sadness and hope. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me the time I needed." And with that, she walked out the door, not knowing what the future held, but knowing that she was finally ready to face it. The future is never certain, but the strength you find in yourself can shape whatever comes next. Months passed, and Nina's life began to shift in ways she hadn't expected. She had started traveling again, something she had always dreamed of doing but had put on hold for years. She had taken time to herself, nurturing the parts of her that had been neglected for so long. And through it all, she found that her heart was healing, not just from the pain of Liam's betrayal, but from the loss of who she had been before. One day, as she sat on a beach in the sun, watching the waves crash against the shore, she realized that the love she had for Liam was still there. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't a love that depended on forgiveness. It was a love that had transformed, a love that was no longer bound by the past. And with that realization, Nina felt a peace settle inside her, knowing that whatever came next, whether it was with Liam or without him, she was whole again.